and welcome to something a bit different. So, today, well, let's say this month is Dan's month,
Oh yeah.
right? You are Mr. Horror Man. You love everything horror.
I do.
So, for that reason, we have decided, or I have decided, well, we both decided that we're going to try something a bit different, where basically I'm going to be asking you some questions and getting into the roots of what do you love about horror and the
Yes.
reasoning for your passion for this genre,
Horrible
shall we
genre.
say? Yes. So yeah, we'll just. I guess we'll just kick straight off with it. So I am
Cool.
I am the Jay Leno of the day.
Oh,
You know,
Jay. Go with
the
Jay.
David Letterman of the day, the
Ooh.
David Attenborough when he's talking to
David
animals. You
Attenborough.
know. So yes, I'll do the interviewee. So we will start, I guess, from the start. Dan,
Okay.
what was it? What was the first horror film? What was your first horror experience?
Well, I just remember always kind of growing up, we used to spend a lot of time down my nan's house, and my granddad would put a lot of films on that we probably shouldn't watch. And I'll never forget RoboCop being the first film I ever remember watching and being like, "Oh my god, this is horrendously scary." Do you know what I mean? Because that opening
Uh,
where he gets shot to bits, I was like, "Oh, this is really scary."
mm,
And then it
mm.
was, I think after that, it was Piranha, the original Piranha. I remember watching
Wow.
that, and yeah, that was more of the sexual side of weird, and I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I think I'm definitely too young for this." Do you know what I mean? But it kind of, those kind of films stuck with me. And then I remember going to Sainsbury's when fucking shops used to sell DVDs. You know what I mean? Remember those days?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember how old I was. I was definitely too young to buy it, so I think I had to get my mum to buy it. But I found the Scream trilogy, 1, 2, and 3.
Oh,
So I
okay.
was like, "Oh, that looks interesting. I've heard of it. I want to watch it." So I bought them. I watched the first one. That kind of changed my life. Do you know what I mean? I loved that first film
Okay.
so much, which we just spoke about, obviously. So I loved that film. But then I kind of horror was never really my thing. It didn't really take off. Like it just wasn't my thing. My brother's thing, very much so. He was always into like Saw and stuff like that. It was always his thing. Watched a bit with him, was still never really my thing. Then a few years back, this big band here came to my kind of view, discovered who they were. I saw a picture of them online and I thought, oh, they look really rubbish. I'm gonna listen to that song. Listen to it. I was like, oh, this is good. And then then it was that, and then it was Dead Meat, and then it was just kind of going with all that. So now it's my genre. Do you know what I mean? Now it's kind of everything I watch realistically. But it was like that massive gap growing up that I was
Hmm.
more of an action film guy or more of a drama film guy. I would watch all the fucking Oscar caliber films and stuff like that. Do you know
Hmm.
what I mean? That was kind of
Okay.
my thing for so long. And then it's only really been in the last 5 years, I'd say, that I'm like really, really into the genre, and I already have like a few tattoos of the genre and stuff like that. And it's just gonna grow from there, really, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Oh, interesting. So you think it was Iceland Kills that kind of brought you back? Did you? I mean, I'm assuming you were like aware of the franchise they were speaking of, but did you
Yeah.
end up looking into the franchises? Because obviously with Iceland Kills, for anyone who doesn't know, they're basically like a horror sort of esque band, aren't
Hmm.
they? So a
Yeah.
lot of their songs are to do with it, to do with Freddy, to do with they
Hmm.
have like but songs specifically for horror films.
Yeah.
So was it something that you heard songs and thought, oh, I'm gonna actually go and check these franchises out, or?
Yeah, so I can't even remember at this point because I remember the first song I'd heard from them was "Hip to Be Scared," so I was like, "Oh, American Psycho." Always loved it anyway, so that's fine.
Yeah.
But then it was kind of like I can't even remember at this point if I'd seen like the Jason franchise. I definitely hadn't seen Freddy 100% because I only
Mm.
very recently did all of those.
Mm.
But again, I'd kind of known all the first of these films, but I don't think I'd seen all of them. I don't even know if I'd seen Friday the 13th, and now that's like pretty much one of my favorite franchises. But yeah, I think it kind of did kind of help me look at more franchises and more films in general. Obviously, you've got stuff like The Shining and stuff, which they've done, which I already watched. But then it was more niche stuff like Sound Like Deadly Night, for example, which is like a Christmas horror from back in the day, which they did a song of, and stuff like My Bloody Valentine and stuff like that, which I hadn't seen. So yeah, it kind of was discovering more films through them, which has always been good, and then finding really weird stuff through stuff like Shudder, through stuff like Dead Meat. If anyone's seen Dead Meat on YouTube, they're a very big horror channel, which are the best. But stuff like that, which has kind of helped me figure stuff out and what I actually really like. So it's been a nice little journey.
Would you say there was like a film along the way there, or something that sort of, as much as it was the bands and the Dead Meat podcast and everything, would you say there was like a film then that you watched that you're like, oh, okay, like this is for me, like,
I mean,
do you know what I mean?
American Psycho was kind of the one I clung to for years. Like, obviously,
Yeah.
that was kind of my favorite film for ages. That was well before I was like super, super into it. But it was kind of going to the cinema and watching random stuff like *Malignant*, where it was one of
Okay.
those films where I wasn't sure what to expect, and then I discovered that I kind of like the sillier side of horror. I like it when they take these big swings, and even if it misses, I can really respect it. Like, I just watched Cobweb like literally 10 minutes ago. Just finished watching it just for a laugh, and it's just one of those films that takes such a big swing that I respect it so much, and it's those films that I really cling to. But yeah, I'd say probably *Malignant*, really, and then there was just the odd little film along the way. Kind of watching the first Halloween in the cinema for the first time, as I said the other day, that was an experience for me because I'd never seen it. So watching that one and then straight into the remake in 2018 was a really cool experience. So it's kind of just discovering stuff like that, you know.
So obviously, with you, your sort of thing was Evil, or is Evil Dead. So was there something that is there something you picked up in the last like 5 years or so, or is that something that you kind of knew from more with Rich and stuff like that?
Yeah, so with Evil Dead, that was a completely different story because I'll never forget when I had my PS3. I used to be one of those guys who used to be like, oh, I want to watch something really weird and scary and like messed
Okay.
up, and I was definitely too young. And I was there looking for websites to watch films on, and I discovered the Evil Dead, and I put it on. And I obviously got to that kind of infamous tree scene, and I was like, "Oh, this is really weird." But I
So
only
is this, sorry, from the original Evil Dead, is it?
from the original, yeah. So I'd seen that one, and I didn't really carry on the franchise until a little bit later. But I had seen all the Evil Deads before I kind of really got into the horror stuff. But I had watched them all because it was one of those franchises that I just kind of enjoyed rather than just saw it as like, "Oh my god, I love this horror genre." It was just one of those franchises that I got a real kick out of, specifically with stuff like Spider-Man introducing me to Bruce Campbell and then going, oh my god, he's also in horror films? I need to see this, do you know what I mean? So it was kind of one of those. That and American Psycho really were kind of, and Scream were like the franchises I watched. And then it was later on I got into the bigger franchises, stuff like Jason, stuff like Chucky, and now Freddy and stuff like that.
Oh, interesting. So, I guess of all the characters, then was there like a character specifically that you were like immediately like, this is my guy, or
I mean, as I said, I was always really scared of Chucky. That was the funny one because that's kind of like one of my favorite franchises now. And I'll never forget walking in on my mum watching Seed of Chucky and just being absolutely horrified because it looked like the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And then you look at Seed of Chucky, you know. But like that was always really scary. So I always wanted to watch them, but they scared me too much. But it was probably either Ghostface or Patrick Bateman, really, at first, because Ghostface was the first, Scream was the first horror film I'd seen in like on my own, watching, discovering for myself, not with my granddad, stuff like that. But Ghostface was the first one. So for years that was kind of my favorite, and obviously, as we mentioned the other day, with like the bleeding mask and that stuff like that in Halloween. That was always fun, but it was always that and Patrick Bateman, really, which is a really weird one because American Psycho is technically a horror film, but it's like a black comedy more than anything, isn't it, realistically? Well, that was kind of my one, and Ghostface, yeah, really.
Yeah. So I guess it's a bit of an open-ended question, but why? why horror in general? Like, I think, what is it that brought you in and keeps you coming back?
I think it is just the sheer creativeness of it, really. I think it's such a open genre that you can do anything with. Specifically, I really like the 80s horror films. They're classics, you know, 80s slashers kind of my favorite. But when you get to the new age films, with films I've been mentioning like *Malignant*, like *Cobweb*, like *The Substance* more recently, you can take these big swings and they might not always work, but they get crowds, they get fans, and that's what I like. There's always specific people that'll really champion your art, and obviously go into something like *Terrifier*, which the first film is really like, if they just based it on that first film, it would have got nothing. Like, that wouldn't be a franchise. But they took a real big swing with that second one, with the fantasy elements and with more character elements, and I just love the creativeness of it. And it weirdly goes, horror and heavy metal goes hand in hand perfectly, as like we all know. It's such a weird thing that they just go hand in hand together. But that community of people is just so good. Like, the mixture of those people is great. And I love it so much. Like, watching Ice Nine Kills at Download for the first time was such an experience because it was just so cool to watch horror films played out two metal songs. It was so fucking bizarre, but it just works. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, I think realistically, it is just the creativeness, and it makes me sad because horror films, horror performances never get nominated, never get noticed by anyone outside of the genre. You know, we had Get Out, which was one exception, but other than that, it never really gets noticed. Like Mia Goth should have been nominated for Pearl easily. Toni Collette should have been nominated for Hereditary very easily, stuff like that, and they kind of get ignored, which is now why I like that we have these award ceremonies in their own genre. There's like the Fangoria Awards, there's the Dead Meat Horror Awards that are now a really, really big thing, which is really cool. So yeah, I'd say the main thing really is just the creativeness of the genre and how passionate the creators are, and I just love to see it. Do you know what I mean? I love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, to carry on with that, then, what do you think is the the big differences today compared to sort of, because I think everything in today's horror or today's films in general, it's all kind of taken bits from older films.
Yeah.
But I think, what would you say is like the big difference in today's horrors compared to the old sort of more classic horrors?
Well, yeah, as you said, there's still a big issue of a lot of nostalgia being used, which is a kind of a big thing, not only in horror, though, it's in everything, isn't it? Nostalgia these days, if you look at the film slate these days, it's sequels, it's remakes, it's whatever. So I think the kind of difference here, again, kind of goes to when those films take really big swings, and we've got really big horror icons now, stuff like Art the Clown, which is a big one. We've still got continuing franchises, something like Beetlejuice that's just come out, but like kind of works in tandem with the original, so it's still kind of fresh and works. Do you know what I mean? I might not be the biggest fan of the new film, but I can respect how much it works. But I think the difference is just the sheer level of, again, it kind of goes back to the creativeness of it all, and I just love to see what people can come up with. And I really like mainstream horror, but unfortunately I do kind of fall into that. I like to see what the smaller creators are doing, so stuff like the Shudder streaming service, stuff like on that, I think are very entertaining because it's like a different world. Something like Late Night with the Devil, which is it harkens back to the 70s. Obviously, it's a whole riff on 70s TV, but with such a fresh and unique spin, and again, just takes these big swings that works for me in the most part, which is what I really respect about modern horror. I'm kind of sick of stuff like throwback possession horrors and stuff like that. That's not really my thing at all. I like The Conjuring and stuff like that, but it's not really what I choose to watch. Whereas something like The Substance, where they take this massive chance towards the end, and it's paid off. Do you know what I mean? It might not have paid off for everyone, because I know people have walked out. I know people have come out going, that was the worst thing I've ever seen. But it's such a swing that you can't help but go, I want to see what they do next. I want to see what that director does next. I want to see what this production company does next. And I think that's kind of what sets it apart. 80s stuff was mainly safe unless you got to the weird side of it, but I feel like now there's a lot more of the weird side coming through, which I really, really like, and I kind of hope it stays like that, you know?
Yeah. So do you think, because obviously I think back in the day, you had a lot more of like franchises, like where things would carry on. You had the Freddy, you had the Jasons, and I think it's probably arguable now, outside of the odd exception, maybe Art, Megan to a degree, like there are a few, but I think there's not. You think we'll have the same level of horror icons anymore, is what I'm sort of trying to get at, because it doesn't seem like we've got those. I think for a lot of the older films, they overstay their welcome, possibly. Yeah, we don't need 10 films of them, but I think in today's time, you very rarely get, again, with the exception of one or two, you're not really getting those big sort of 3 to 4 film franchises. So yeah, do you think we'll sort of continue in 10 years, we'll be able to look back and go, these are the new horror icons?
Part of me hopes so, but then I get those little worries, specifically at the minute. A really good question, because the example I can use is Terrifier 3 is about to come out now in a week, and then they've already confirmed the 4th one. I don't want this franchise to go too far. Like, I think they only really need 3 or 4 to kind of be that franchise. Then you can look back and go, that was a franchise that I really liked, and I think they're still pretty good. But the 80s, I don't know what it was, the times of the 70s and 80s, it was just different. I think it was obviously a lack of social media to begin with. There wasn't all this like debate online of, oh my god, I hate him, I love him. It wasn't that. It was fans who saw them, followed the films. Do you know what I mean? That's what it was. Whereas now all you see online is discourse of every single film that comes out. It could be literally anything, and there's going to be a conversation about it. Do you know what I mean? So I think that kind of ruined it to a degree. But I think the level of filmmaking these days has really gone up and down. and you kind of look
Yeah.
to certain directors, really. Like, for example, someone like James Wan and Lee Winnell, who kind of started the Saw franchise. They carried on and did what? I mean, their franchise is still going. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's an iconic franchise in its own right. But
Mm.
when you think of films of, like, as for example, Terrifier, as much as I love it, if we hit that fourth film mark and it just drops off, I can't see them continue it, just chucking them out, because I think people are going to stop caring if that film isn't good. Do you know what I mean? And even stuff like, as silly as it is, the Twisted Childhood thing, the Winnie the Pooh universe thing, that thing, it started off really bad, but with a shock of an idea. But people are already starting to fall off. So that's not going to be an iconic franchise. It's going to be a franchise you look back on and go, that was fun to watch, but it's not going to be an iconic franchise. And I hope we get franchises that live on. I think Terrifier will kind of be the one to do that. And I think there'll be other little franchises that start to do that. But we do seem to get a lot of one-offs these days. Stuff like Malignant, stuff like Barbarian. And I'm not really that annoyed about it, because not everything needs a sequel.
No, that's fair.
But at the same time, we do still need iconic franchises to follow. I think that's a lot of fun. Even if they do drop in quality sometimes, I think having one franchise just to sit down and watch every now and again is a lot of fun. So I kind of hope we do. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know. I don't know how it'll go in the future.
Yeah, it kind of feels like horror in general is kind of built on the icons, and yeah, I think we could probably do with a few more, especially going forward. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But I guess to follow on then, where do you think horror is going?
Well, I think there's a trend, isn't there? It always seems to follow a trend. You kind of get the paranormal stuff that was Paranormal Activity, and then that went up for a while.
Yeah.
Then you had the torture side of it, where you had Saw, you had The Collector, you had stuff like that for a while. And I feel like we've come back to this weird place of just pure gore, which is where we're at right now, which is so bizarre. Like we're in a resurgence of gore films, which is great. And I do think Terrifier kicked that off, and now everything has kind of started to follow suit. But we're also touching into this weird body horror stuff again now, which is coming back out.
Yeah, we are.
We had Barbarian, which kind of touches on it. The Substance, I will never stop singing his praises, because the body horror elements to that film are fucking insane. And I kind of want more of that, do you know what I mean? But I think it just follows a trend. Someone's going to do something. Obviously, as I just mentioned, the Winnie the Pooh franchise, they started that, and now we've got all these other, Mickey Mouse and stuff coming out. Like, unfortunately, horror is a massive trend follower, and whatever does well, people will try and replicate. And I think that's what it is. I just hope we get more of the body horror and like sci-fi stuff. I kind of really like sci-fi horror, so I'm looking forward to the new VHS, which comes out tomorrow, because it's all like sci-fi short films.
Okay,
So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I think gore is at where we're at the minute, just random gore films, which is kind of bizarre to say in this year, but I love it. But I think next is gonna I think there'll be something that follows The Substance, and then we'll kind of have that weird little genre for a bit, and then we'll just move on. So I don't know. It literally is whatever's setting a trend at that point.
I guess okay. Then to follow is there anything you would like to see more? Is there any sort of genre or part of horror that you don't think gets enough love?
I mean, slasher for me was the big one. Back in the 80s, obviously, everything was slasher. We don't really get that as often now. We more get psychological stuff, or we get flat out just like gore films. I kind of loved... So, In a Violent Nature, that came out this year, that was one of my favourites of the year. Very experimental, very different. I know a lot of people don't like it, but it was one of those that really just like captured my attention, because it is like watching Jason from his point of view, which I think is a lot of fun. And I think that is that's a film that could be a franchise that could go on to do really well. But if they held it at that like silent walk-in for 9 films, that's going to be a problem. But I think if they can kind of tweak it and kind of get this perfect, I think that could be something. So I'd really like a resurgence of almost like throwback slashers. That's kind of what I want.
Okay.
But I know that is kind of generic, unfortunately, because the slasher genre was so full back in the day. But we just don't see it as much anymore. And then people who do try, they're just never that good, unfortunately. That's why I really liked In a Violent Nature, because it was something different while remaining comfortable to that genre. So I kind of hope we get stuff like that, more slasher things, done well. Not just Scream, not just another Halloween franchise. Give us a new one with a good character, and I think that could be really good. So that's what I'd like to see.
So would you say, of all the sort of, I guess, sub-genres of horror, would you say like slasher's your thing, or is there another thing, I guess, out there
No,
that.
I really like the slasher genre. It's just, that kind of tension of a cat and mouse chase is kind of my favorite thing. But then I really like body horror stuff as well. I think it's really fucking bizarre, and if it's done well, it can really stick with you, which is something like The Substance, for example. But there's a film back in, I can't remember if it's 80s or 90s, called Society, which The Substance very clearly referenced in the end scene. And that's one of those films where you watch it, it's kind of weird for the first bit, and then it just gets mad bizarre towards the end. So I really like body horror stuff as well, specifically like The Fly and stuff like that as well from back in the day. Those kind of films that are so creative and so different are kind of what I love. But then I just don't think you can also beat just a straightforward slasher. So if you do those well, I think they're good. So those are kind of my favourites there, really.
Fair. So I guess, well, you have a lot of films, Dan. An awful lot of films. So I want to ask, how many horrors do you think, if you had to put a rough number on it, how many horror films do you think overall that you have seen?
Ooh, that I've seen. Ooh.
You've seen, yeah.
I don't even know, to be fair. So I've just counted. My Blu-ray collection alone is up to 600 now. I've got a cupboard full of DVDs. I've got films kind of scattered around my house. So realistically, if I had to kind of split it between those, I don't know. It's probably in maybe 400s. Maybe.
That's not bad, that.
No, that
It's
might be
not
me
bad, that, is
being
it?
generous, but that might be around the 400s.
Is there anything, obviously you said you have 600 Blu-rays, which is outrageous. So is there anything out there that you, like a rarity, like a film out there that you're like, I need it, and it's really difficult to get?
So, I mean, the one that really screams to you at the moment is 28 Days Later on Blu-ray as a release. It's fucking solid to grab now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's become I've got them both on DVD. But as a Blu-ray set, that's really hard to come by now, and I can't remember why, but I think they went out of print a while back, so those are a real rough one to find. And unfortunately, America get a lot more releases than we do. So as I was saying about Barbarian, that never got a Blu-ray release. So
Okay.
if that was to get an official Blu-ray release, that would be the first one I'd grab. Prey, the Predator film, took ages to come to Blu-ray here as well.
Yeah.
It finally did, but that was one that took a while. We still don't have the Hellraiser remake, which is one I really, really would love. That is one.
Hey.
And it's really hard to buy Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X in the UK. So those are the ones I want. Those are the only ones I need for my Friday collection as well. So those ones.
Hey, so is there anything in that collection that you'd say is like your prize? Your
Oh, in
your
my
one?
collection?
If you were to go, if your current collection, is there a film in there, or a franchise, or something where you can go, yeah, this is. I want you to boast a little bit, Dan. That's what I want.
Yeah,
I
I'm
want you to
trying
kind of like, for all the film nerds out there with
Yeah.
their Blu-rays and stuff, I wanted to kind of boast a little and say, hey, I got this.
I mean, the only way I'm thinking of it right now is I've got American Psycho on the big box VHS release, the official one. So that cost me quite a bit. Then I've got the US version of that film, and I've got the UK version of that film on Blu-ray, and I've got the DVD. So I've got 4 versions of that film alone, which is kind of clearly I love that film a lot. But there's nothing.
Shit.
Yeah, there's nothing really like rare I've got really. I'm trying to start collecting a lot more steelbooks because I like to display them on the wall. Which I've got the Halloween Kills one that came out recently, the Candyman one which came out quite a while back. But there's nothing like specifically rare in my collection at this minute. There's stuff I want. I really want the Scream Factory Friday the 13th box set that came out in America a few years back. It's like 200 odd quid. It's just eventually I need to buy a Blu-ray player first because those Blu-rays will not play in the UK. So I need to buy that first and then the Friday collection. But no, there's nothing really specifically rare. I'd probably say just the like volume of stuff I own. And like I said, I just own like 4 versions of American Psycho just because I love it. Like the big box version of that VHS release, I love it. It's on my display shelf. It's just cool. It's just cool things to have, you know.
Very nice, Dan. Very nice. For there are a lot of people out there. Well, there are probably a few people out there who go, no.
Oh,
Very jealous
I
about
love
that. So would you say there's anything underrated? So I want to go into the deep. So would you say there is an underrated horror that you would suggest for people?
Well, funnily enough, as I mentioned it earlier, I just finished watching it. Cobweb that came out 2 years ago, maybe last year. I can't remember. I think it released alongside Oppenheimer, which really fucking stopped it from doing anything.
Yeah, no, I do remember it being released, but yeah, it didn't seem to do well in our
No.
ending cinema.
No, if I'm going like modern releases, I'd say that one because I watched it earlier, and as much as I liked it the first time round, rewatching it this time, it's got Tony Starr, Homelander. It's got Homelander in it.
Okay.
And his performance in that is like totally different to Homelander. Like he's so good. And it's again one of those films where it's a little bit slow, but the characters are so good and like the dialogue is great. And then you get past that halfway point and it just goes fucking off the rails. And I don't think enough people are seeing these films that are just like slow builders and then popping off. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of like this genre that's come out of nowhere as well, where you've got this weird little build and then you've got a fucking crazy last. And I think that's one of them. If you haven't seen Cobweb, it's definitely something to have a look at and watch when you've got some spare time, because the reveal towards the end is really cool as well. I really like it. And then Barbarian. I'll never ever stop saying about Barbarian. Never ever ever. It's one of those films that it just perfectly encapsulates scary and funny to like the best degree I've ever seen. Straight up, it's so good, and it's just a shock to the system, that film, because it is genuinely freaky, but then you'll be so scared but then laugh in the next minute, and I love it so much. And it's got a really weird amount of emotion in the end as well, which I think it just ties it in perfectly. So definitely, if you're looking for modern underrated films, those two for me, 100%.
Lovely stuff. So I guess to wrap it all up, Dan, what would you, so for anybody who loves horror, for anyone who doesn't like horror, for anybody just interested, can you sell it? Sell me the reason why you love horror, why everyone should watch horror, and what it is about horror that you love.
I think, again, it kind of goes back to it's a very creative genre. If you enjoy seeing stuff that isn't just two people talking on a screen, you know, you get a bit of a dramatic thing. A lot of films follow the same formula these days, let's be honest. A lot of characters on screen, you get to the ending, it's done, that's it. But with horror, whether you're watching Terrifier, whether you're watching Scream, whether you're watching X, whether you're watching whatever, there's different avenues every single time. There's always a different avenue. It's a lot of the creators of certain films almost feel like a family to themselves, which I really like. For example, the Chucky franchise, where they've been working together now for years. Like every member of this cast has been on since the beginning at this point, and new ones come in and they're just perfectly into this new family. And I think it really translates on screen. It just makes those films that you feel like people who cared made these films. You get these films, like, obviously I haven't seen it yet, but Joker 2, a lot of rumors going around that it feels phoned in, it feels false, just because the first one made $1 billion, so they were like, we need a sequel, let's just do whatever, make it a musical, who cares? But where horror film, it does semi well, and they're not going to go, okay, we need a sequel, because they do it because they've got more ideas and they've got more creative alleys to go down. And again, unfortunately, it goes back to Terrifier, it goes back to all that, where you can see such a passion in these people. It's disgusting. Obviously, it's gross and unreal, but there's such a passion in these creators that you just want to see what they do next, and that's what gets me every time. I came out of The Substance, and I now know that the director did another film called Revenge, which I really need to get and watch, because I loved the way she could see things and the way she directed things. Like, it's so fucking good. And I think if you can kind of find a director or creators that you really like, for me, one of them is Ari Aster, who did Hereditary. I followed him from that one. He did Midsommar, which I thought was really good. Beau is Afraid, which is something. It's a film, so, that's fine. But I really can't wait to see what he does next. So I think you always find these creators that you'll enjoy. And don't get me wrong, you'll do that through any film, obviously, but I think horror is just a different breed, because you never know what way they're going to go next. Like, there's so many different alleys they can go, and there's so much horror influence now anyway in just general media. I mean, look what Marvel are doing right now with Agatha All Along. It's marketed as a Halloween show. Do you know what I mean? Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness was marketed as a horror film. And it's just cool to see these creators, new and old, do their thing and kind of flex what they can do. And you're always going to watch a horror film and go, nah, that wasn't for me. But then you're going to find another one after that and go, yes, that's the one I want to follow. That's what I want to see do next. So I think it's just diving in, finding something you think looks interesting, giving it a go, and just going from there. If you didn't enjoy it, you don't enjoy it. But if you do, like you just did with Elm Street, where you've never watched them before, and now you're like wanting to watch the whole franchise. I mean, it's just, it speaks for itself. You find a beginning of a franchise that you'll enjoy, and you just have a great time following it. So I think that's kind of it, really.
Lovely. Well, I hope that was insightful. I hope
hope so
that
too.
was. I hope it was enjoyable for you. Get some of your horrorness off your chest. I
Yeah,
guess.
that was a wonderful little video. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah. So yeah, if you would like anything similar to these, we may
may.
try to get a guest.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
if everything can work out properly.
Yeah.
You'll all know him as soon as he turns up. He's mentioned every day. So yeah, we may do something like this again this month if we can all sort of get together. But yeah, just let us know.
Yes.
If you enjoy this sort of form of things, if you'd like us to try and do more of these sort of interviewee style things
100%.
going forward. Dan, it's been a pleasure.
It has. It's been lovely.
To
Thank you very
speak
much.
to you about horror
Anytime.
and stuff, Still not that arse, but I like the fact that you love it. So yes, thank you everybody for listening. Dan, I will let you lead us out.
Yep, thank you very much for watching. Obviously, check the socials at the end. We're on all of those that are mentioned in the back. I haven't uploaded anything on Spotify for a while, but I think this will go to Spotify. So if you'd like to just listen to it instead, you're more than welcome to. So thank you very much, and we will see you next time.
Bye.